6:41 in the morning. The cold alarm went off inside the Desert Hands Relief Warehouse on the southern edge of Albuquerque. That sound was sharp, piercing, almost inhuman. It wasn't a fire alarm, and it wasn't triggered by a temperature spike. I knew, because I was the one who installed it. That alarm only went off when the Hera system detected something unacceptable. A shipment that required a registered responsible person, and there was no one left on the list. The screen flashed a single line: responsible person, none registered. In a cold storage, silence is always a good sign. When the alarm goes off, it means someone's been stupid. That morning, HR had just graduated from that class. Greg, the refrigeration engineer, stared at the monitor. The red light flickered in his eyes like a trembling flame. He tried entering the emergency password. The system replied with calm indifference. Authorization key expired. He muttered a curse and turned to the shift supervisor. Call Marina. She knows how to bypass this. The supervisor shook his head. Can't. HR fired her yesterday. Greg looked up, his usually steady eyes narrowing. Then who's in charge? The accountant standing nearby whispered, No one. The alarm kept howling, long, steady, and far more honest than anyone in that room. I wasn't there to hear it. That morning, I was home making coffee. The water took its time to boil. My mother's old kettle wheezed like an old chest breathing. I watched the steam rise and wondered if the warehouse was still holding at 36 degrees Fahrenheit. It's strange how when you leave a place, the part of you that stayed behind keeps living in your head like background music. I'd worked at Desert Hands Relief for 7 years. People called it a charity, but in truth, it was a tangled web of spreadsheets, reports, and too many people who thought cutting budgets was the same as solving problems. I joined after my knee gave out during a summer emergency run. The ambulance broke down in the middle of the desert. The diabetic patient inside was unconscious, and the insulin had spoiled 8 degrees over the limit. I still remember that sharp, sweet smell of ruined medicine mixing with sweat in the 110-degree air. I couldn't save him. The next day, I made a decision. If I couldn't keep people alive with my hands, I'd keep medicine alive with my mind. I studied logistics, cold chain pharmaceuticals, and federal controlled substance regulations. I built HERA, the system that monitored temperature, certification, routes, chain of custody logs, and the clause requiring a responsible person. Without me, HERA could still run. But without my signature, it wasn't legally allowed to operate. That wasn't power, it was a liability. I never cared for fame. At the company, they called me the woman who talks to refrigerators. I didn't correct them, I just smiled. Refrigerators are the easiest things to understand. You give them the right conditions, and they stay steady. People, not so much. Greg once said I was like Hera, cold, precise, impatient with error. He wasn't wrong. I just happened to know how to laugh. The morning before HR called me in, I was still patching an overload alert in the insurance module. The door opened, and Cheryl Bloom, the new head of HR, walked in. She smiled like someone who'd just won a game without knowing the rules. In her hand were pink forms and a stack of invoices I'd submitted last month. She said, We need to talk about these expenses. The training fund isn't for advanced refrigeration certifications or HERA maintenance software. I nodded. Without those, you'll need another fund, the legal one. Her eyebrows tightened. You don't have budget approval authority. No. But I do hold the operating license your company needs to ship medicine across state lines. No one said a word for several seconds. Then Cheryl flushed, smiled again, and said, I've spoken to the CEO. Your employment ends here. I stood up, unhooked my badge. You have 13 minutes to find someone who knows where the locks are. I laid the badge on the table and walked out. She thought I was bluffing. But I knew the system waited exactly 15 minutes after a responsible account was deleted before reverting to no signature. I didn't have to lift a finger. I just took my hands off the wheel. I still remember stepping out of that building. The air outside was cold, but it felt easier to breathe. 7 years in a place where compliance was treated as a department, not a duty, had made me forget that freedom has its own scent. I went home, set down my keys, opened my laptop, and confirmed. HERA, change of responsible person, None. The system replied, acknowledged. No smoke, no fire. Just one line on a white screen. Back in the warehouse, the alarm was still screaming. Greg was trying to rewrite access rights, but the system demanded the responsible person's fingerprint. No fingerprint, no entry. He called the tech department. They replied, no one has root access anymore. We removed her from the admin list. Greg sighed. Then, might as well remove our ability to work too. A young employee asked, is there any other way? He shook his head. No. No person, no authority, no medicine. We can keep it cold, but we can't send it. If you've ever heard the cold alarm in a warehouse, you know it's unlike any other sound. Not loud like a fire siren, just steady, precise, emotionless. As if it's saying, I'm only doing my job. I still hear that sound in my head, even after leaving the company. It's not haunting, it's a reminder of one simple truth. Machines don't hate people. They only mirror how people treat their work. Now I'm curious about something. Where in the world are you watching this from? Leave a comment below. Let me know how far the sound of that cold alarm has traveled. By 7 in the morning, the first report hit headquarters. Shipment delay due to authorization error. Right beneath it, a system note read, responsible person, terminated 11/18. 2 lines, side by side. Anyone reading carefully would understand. But no one reads carefully when they think they're still in control. The alarm kept howling, louder, longer. Greg removed his headset and whispered to the person beside him, cold never makes noise, not unless it's about to melt. I finished my coffee, now cold, and watched the first light of day pass through the window. There was no feeling of victory, just a quiet stillness, like a freezer that had finally reached its perfect temperature. People think being fired always means anger or despair. For me, it didn't. It felt fair. I did my part by the law. They forgot that the law isn't as soft as promises. I think if you really want to know how a system works, just step out of it. You'll see what's left start to reveal its true nature. 2 weeks ago, everything looked fine, until someone decided to clean the books, and this morning they're just reaping what they sowed. When the cold alarm went off that morning, I was no longer there, but I knew exactly what it was saying, because I was the one who taught it to speak. And if Hera was sounding an alert, it meant someone had touched something they didn't understand. I was 38 and still didn't have a business card that said what I really did. People called me a refrigeration engineer, a supply chain manager, or a compliance specialist. None of those were true. My real job was to keep medicine from dying before the patient did. I used to be a paramedic. On 110-degree days, we drove ambulances across the desert, sirens screaming louder than the wind. I'd seen many people die, but only one death changed me. An old man with diabetes. His insulin was ruined when the fridge lost power. I gave him the injection, knowing it was useless, but I still did it, out of reflex or denial. When the heart monitor flattened into a single line, I understood. It wasn't the doctor who failed him, it was the temperature. The next day, I quit. I made myself a promise. If I couldn't keep people alive with my hands, I'd keep medicine alive with a system. I went back to study logistics. The class was full of young students talking about AI, efficiency, and automation. I only cared about one range of numbers, 36 to 46 degrees Fahrenheit. Miss it by 2, and all that talk about efficiency meant nothing. I started building Hera in my small kitchen, late at night, when my mother was asleep. Hera wasn't pretty, didn't have a shiny logo, but it remembered every minute, every tiny deviation. Who opened the door, who signed, who was responsible. It logged everything. No one could erase history without leaving a fingerprint. By federal law, every pharmaceutical warehouse must have a responsible person, licensed, legally accountable. At Desert Hands Relief, that person was me, and Hera only ran with my professional signature. Without me, it didn't operate. Not because I wanted it that way, because the law did. My coworkers called me the woman who talks to refrigerators. I never argued. Each morning, I walked past the cold units and whispered, "Good morning, number 3. Stay steady." They laughed. I replied, "At least refrigerators don't talk about team spirit." That was the only joke I kept after 7 years. My job was dull but precise. Every time a batch of medicine left the warehouse, my heart slowed half a beat, as if I'd just seen someone survive. No one noticed. That was fine. I worked to keep things on schedule, not to be seen. My house sat in the suburbs, small, with faded yellow walls. My mother had arthritis and liked listening to old country songs on AM radio. I drank cold coffee, not because I forgot, but because I hated rushing. Cold coffee doesn't spoil, it just loses its illusion. So did I. Once my mother asked, "Don't you get tired of living around machines all day?" I said, "Machines don't lie." She smiled, soft and slow. "If the fridge isn't humming, I know you're not home." I didn't realize that line would become a metaphor for my entire career, because when I left, the fridges began to hum, and this time, no one knew how to turn them off. I'd never asked for a raise. The only thing I ever requested was a small fund to renew my license and add an insurance module to HERA. I even attached a note, necessary to avoid federal violations in controlled substance transport. No one read it. They approved it automatically. 3 months later, HR audited the accounts and called it a misuse of funds. They said I'd spent company money on personal training. The irony was sharp. Learning to save lives had been labeled an administrative offense. I didn't work with data, I worked with lives. But HR only saw expense lines. To them, I was just another entry under out of budget training. They didn't understand HERA, and they didn't need to. As long as the system ran, they thought everything was fine. But systems don't stay loyal to people, they stay loyal to the rules. I once sent Cheryl, the new HR director, a 77-page document titled, "Hand over if I get hit by a bus." I laughed when I pressed send. She replied with a thumbs up emoji. I wasn't angry. I just made a note in the system log. Documentation delivered. Unread. I knew that day would come. The day they'd decide I was redundant. I just didn't expect it so soon. The cold alarm that morning wasn't the start of a disaster. It was the conclusion. The conclusion of 7 years spent holding a system steady with one hand. I don't know how panicked they were. I only know this. When that alarm went off, Hera had completed its final task, reminding them that responsibility cannot be fired. I once told Greg that every company has at least one person hired just to check if you're breathing too evenly. At Desert Hands Relief, that person's name was Cheryl Bloom. She was 31, with hair so blonde it looked fiber optic, and a smile so white it could have been sponsored by a dental brand. Before this, she worked in PR for a winery in Santa Barbara, where the job was to make everything look like it belonged, even lies. Then one day, she appeared here, carrying a new title, Human Resources Director. Her mission was to modernize and increase transparency. People said she was the board chairman's niece. I wasn't surprised. In this industry, family ties often count as a special kind of license. On her first day at the warehouse, Cheryl walked into a 4 degrees Celsius hallway wearing white heels. She looked around and frowned. "Why aren't there any motivational posters here?" she asked. Greg, the refrigeration engineer, tilted his head and whispered to me. "Maybe she's never heard a compressor before." I said softly, "She will. Soon enough." She started something she called a civilized audit. Everyone had to submit their spending for the last 3 months. I sent mine in 5 minutes. Formatted, neat, just 3 lines. DEA, license renewal. Advanced Refrigeration Compliance Course, Insurance Module for HERA. I didn't add another word. In my head, explaining legal liability to someone who doesn't understand it feels about as useful as teaching a fridge to sing. 3 days later, Cheryl walked into my office with that peculiar smile, the kind people wear when they think they're about to say something management level. "Marina," she said, "I noticed some of your expenses haven't been approved. We'll discuss this in the quarterly meeting." Her voice was light, like she was pitching a new vitamin supplement. I nodded. "Good. Be prepared." She didn't realize what I meant. Quarterly meeting, third quarter. The theme was team spirit. They served cold donuts and pre-brewed coffee. When HR's turn came, Cheryl stood up, her heels clicking against the cold tile, holding a stack of pink forms. She walked to the center of the room, smiling as bright as the fluorescent lights. We have a financial discipline issue, she announced. Heads turned, and I saw my name printed in bold on the first page. Marina Ortiz, unauthorized expenditures. She took a deep breath, as if about to swear an oath. One employee used company funds for courses and software not on the approved list. I believe we must set an example. I looked at the pink papers. That color is usually used for thank you notes. Here, it was the color of a trap. Cheryl turned to me, voice steady. Ms. Ortiz, would you like to explain? I set down my coffee cup, calm. I used that budget to keep this company on the right side of federal law and to make sure the medicine actually reached the people who need it. Someone coughed quietly. Cheryl tilted her head, still smiling, but I could see the confidence start to drain from her eyes. You don't have the authority to approve budgets, she said. No, I replied, but I do have the authority to sign the license your company uses to operate. She blinked, then laughed, the kind of laugh you learn from crisis management workshops. Marina, don't make this dramatic. It's just a procedure. I nodded. I agree. And that procedure will lock itself in 13 minutes. No one laughed. Only the faint hiss of the air system filled the room. The CEO cleared his throat, trying to speak, but Cheryl jumped in first. I've consulted legal. Ms. Ortiz had no authorization for training expenditures. Termination is effective immediately. Her voice was as stiff as molded plastic. No one objected, but no one supported her either. The whole room held its breath, the kind of silence people keep when they're afraid they might be next. I stood slowly and unhooked my badge. I walked to the center table and placed it on top of the pink stack. You have 13 minutes to call the right person. After that, the lock expires, just like it's supposed to. She laughed, short and brittle. Are you threatening me? No, I said, just informing you of the procedure. Then I walked away. My footsteps echoed softly on the concrete floor, steady like the hiss of compressed air in the cold room. As I reached the door, I heard Cheryl's voice behind me. I know her type. Always thinks she's important. I didn't turn around. I just thought important isn't the word. Accurate is. Greg later told me that right after I left, Cheryl said, "Someone reset her access. Don't let the system freeze," a tech replied. Impossible. She's the only one with root credentials. Cheryl scoffed. Nothing's impossible to override. Greg looked at her calmly. You've never seen something that runs on ethics, have you? No one answered. I stepped into the parking lot, sunlight blazing on the concrete. The wind was dry, but cold. I opened my car, started the engine, and glanced at the clock. 12 minutes left. I pictured the room, white lights, pale faces, the screen flashing a single line. Authorization expired. Maybe Cheryl was still smiling. She believed every failure could be fixed with a reset. But the real world doesn't have that button. Some things, once you touch them without understanding, all you can do is watch them stop. I drove off thinking, the warehouse will grow colder by 1 degree, not because of the system, because they just lost the only person who kept it warm. I wasn't in a hurry. People usually imagine that anyone just fired will rush to pack, as if leaving a minute too late means being dragged out by security. I didn't. I cleared my desk like I was arranging the medical chart of a dying patient. Carefully, every detail, every sheet. There were 3 things on my desk: a chipped porcelain coffee mug, a small radio my mother gave me, and an old USB drive wrapped in silver tape. I opened the drawer, took out the USB, and added a fresh strip of label tape. With a black marker, I wrote, "Checklist when the responsible person is absent." I placed it neatly in the center of the desk, under the cold, white light. I didn't know who would find it. Maybe Greg, maybe no one. But if anyone opened it, they'd see 77 pages of instructions I had written, step by step, key by key, every emergency path Hera allowed when things went wrong. I'd taught Hera to obey the law, not people. It wouldn't help anyone unless they were legally allowed to be helped. Outside, the sun was bright, but the desert wind still carried the last breath of winter. I grabbed my old jacket, the same one I wore the first time I came here, back when the warehouse didn't even have a name. Back then, it was just an empty shell. No machines, no compressors, no Hera. Now it had everything except the one person in charge. Greg stood at the exit, holding a stack of files. He didn't say a word, just nodded. I nodded back. Sometimes respect doesn't need words. The warehouse door hissed as it opened. Cold air spilled out, thick like fog. I paused and took a deep breath. It smelled like metal, like duty, like 7 years of keeping everything between 36 and 46 degrees Fahrenheit. In 1 hour, it would stabilize, then fall into safety mode. Without me, the system would treat it as an emergency. I knew, because I had built it that way. As I walked past HR's office, I heard laughter. Cheryl's voice. She was on the phone. "It's fine. I've got it under control. She's just a tech. She can't do anything." I smiled. Maybe she was right, in her own way. At least not in the way she understood do anything. I reached the parking lot. The sunlight hit the silver roof of the car like a mirror. The air was dry, but sharp. I opened the door, sat down, hands on the wheel. Before starting the engine, I unlocked my phone and logged into the system. The screen showed responsible person, Marina Ortiz, active. I typed slowly. Hera, confirm change of responsible person, none. 1 second passed. Then the screen replied, acknowledged, transition to inactive state, audit log created. I read it once more and closed the phone. No additions, no deletions. I didn't touch the system. I simply returned it to its rightful owner, no one. I started the car. The engine rumbled, low and steady. In the rearview mirror, the warehouse shrank, fading a little more with each yard. On the white wall behind it, the words, Desert Hands Relief, glared in the sunlight. So bright, it hurt to look at. I wondered if they'd ever realize the irony of that name. Hands of the desert. Hands that never held on to anything. A few miles down the road, my phone buzzed. Notification from Hera. Access key revoked. All authorizations require renewal. Status? System in compliance. I laughed quietly. System in compliance. The phrase sounded like the perfect goodbye. I'd done my job. The system was legal. The process is clean. The responsibility is clear. I didn't leave chaos behind. I just stepped out of a role no one else had learned to value. As I merged onto the highway, the sky opened wide and hazy like frosted glass. The radio came on, my mother's old station. A country song played, the singer softly talking about walking away in silence. I smiled. Fitting. I thought of my mother, of how she once said, "If the fridge isn't humming, I'll know you're not home." Now I was gone, and the fridges, surely, were humming. At a junction, I stopped at a small gas station and bought more coffee. The young attendant asked, "You work at that pharma warehouse, right?" "Heard the alarms went off this morning," I answered lightly. "Probably just the system adjusting itself." He laughed, not knowing I'd just told the most truthful thing of the day. I walked back to my car holding the warm cup and looked out toward the distance, rows of white containers glinting in the sun. I felt no guilt, no triumph, just balance. Because for the first time in years, I wasn't holding the system up on my shoulders. When I left, I knew that world would grow colder, not out of anger, but because I was the only warmth it ever had. People forget that every system, no matter how advanced, starts with a human being who fears consequences. When that person is gone, the system doesn't crash. It simply does what the law commands. It stops. I pressed the accelerator, leaving a faint trail of dust behind me. In the mirror, the warehouse stood still, quiet as a tomb. But I knew that in a few hours, the chain reaction would begin. Shipments delayed, trucks frozen in place, insurers refusing confirmations, emails bouncing back, phones ringing off the hook. Not because anyone was punished, but because the system had just lost the only responsible person it recognized. I didn't destroy anything. I just removed my name from the word responsible. And sometimes that alone is enough to make the whole world a degree colder. People tend to think that when a system collapses, it explodes. It doesn't. It just gets quieter. The status lights start blinking more slowly. The familiar background hum disappears. And in a cold warehouse, silence is never a good sign. It's the sound of death, but no one hears it that way. 7:14 in the morning, cold storage unit 3. A pallet of insulin waits to be shipped to El Paso. The label reads, "Critical, pediatric use." A worker scans the barcode. No response. The printer spits out a blank sheet with a single line printed at the bottom corner, small as a whisper. Responsible person. Verification. Missing. The shift manager assumes it's a software glitch. He turns the scanner off, then back on, and tries again. Nothing changes. He calls it, but the line is busy. On the central display, Hera shows shipment ID 37462, authorization chain incomplete. A gray lock icon appears, cold and unmoving, like the air itself. I can picture it clearly, the smell of refrigerant, the pale white light on the medicine boxes, and Greg, the engineer who never panicked even when circuits burned, squinting at the screen. He must have muttered, "That's not a technical error." 8:05. The second controlled shipment, morphine and naloxone, stops mid-process. A faint red message flashes on screen. Status: pending authorization. The logistics team gathers around, silent. Someone asks, "Did anyone try restarting Hera?" Another voice, dry, replies, "Restart who?" We don't have a licensed person anymore. The air thickens. The compressors still hum, but softer, like even they're holding their breath. In that cold, people start realizing there are things you can't fix with a button. Upstairs, Cheryl Bloom is trying to stay calm. Her suit is still pressed, but her hair's a mess, and her voice carries a strain she can't hide. Storage 3 is frozen. No shipments are moving. Is there a specific error? Yes. No valid responsible person found. She looks up from her phone. "I'll handle it. Keep going. Don't stop operations." She hangs up and turns to the emergency tech team. "Can we temporarily bypass the authorization check?" A young engineer answers softly, as if afraid of being blamed. "No. That part's locked under the federal license. If we remove it, it's a violation." Cheryl frowns. "I'm not asking about the law. I'm asking about the system." He looks at her, keeping his voice steady. "Technically, yes, but it'll log the event. When that log hits the federal database, the company gets suspended." A heavy silence fills the room. Then Cheryl says quietly but firmly, "Do it. I'll take responsibility." The door opens. A man from legal steps in, coffee still in hand. "You can't," he says slowly. "You're not legally authorized." The words hit the table like a stone dropped into ice water. No one moves. On the whiteboard behind her, the slogan, "Transparency is trust," stares back like mockery. At that moment, I'm on Highway 40, heading toward Santa Fe. My phone buzzes with a system alert. Hera alert. Multiple authorization attempts detected. Action taken. Ignored. No valid credentials found. I look at the screen and let out a small laugh. Not out of spite, just recognition. Hera was still loyal. Not to me, but to the rule I'd built into it. Never serve the unauthorized. Machines rarely fail. They just follow the procedures we teach them. 9 a.m. Inside the warehouse, the alerts flare up like fireworks. Shipment queue frozen. Vendor sync failed. Insurance claim auto hold initiated. Each line was another crack in the illusion of order Cheryl had built. A logistics worker whispers, "Should we call Marina back?" Cheryl spins around. "No, she's gone." Greg, still standing in the corner, says quietly, "She also took the system's right to exist." No one replies. They don't have to. Everyone understands. I pull into a rest stop and open my phone. The Hera dashboard shows the graph fading. Green points turning gray, then white. I rest my hand on the screen, gently as if touching something asleep. I once promised my mother, even if I quit one day, she could still trust that the patient's medicine would be safe. Today, that promise is still true. Hera is only protecting it, exactly as I taught it to. 9:02. The alarm goes off inside the cold storage. No one runs, no one shouts, only the sound of cold itself. Thick, heavy, almost visible. On the main screen, one final message appears. All shipments are on hold, awaiting responsible person registration. Cheryl stands still, her nails digging into the table, leaving red marks. Greg checks his watch. 2 hours exactly. Someone whispers, afraid to break the silence. What do we do now? Greg answers softly, wait. Or call back the only person the system ever trusted. On the radio in my car, the announcer's voice comes steady. Breaking news. Medical shipments in South Albuquerque are temporarily halted due to technical issues. I take a sip of cold coffee, watching sunlight spill across the desert. Not technical, I whisper to myself. I start the engine. Behind me, the world slows down, 1 degree at a time, and in that slowing, panic finally begins. Crisis never arrives with an explosion. It comes through a chain of emails, sent in panic and haste, each one stamped with the same subject line: urgent, system recovery. I've seen that kind of crisis before. Back when I drove an ambulance, a patient's heart would stop and someone would still ask, is there still time to sign the insurance form? Now, that someone was Cheryl Bloom. Only this time, the patient was a company. By noon, she called an IT consulting firm. 3 people arrived, young, tidy, all wearing polo shirts with the same Tech Fair Consulting logo. They opened their laptops, reviewed the system for a few minutes, and delivered their diagnosis like doctors announcing a terminal illness. You'll need to reset root access. Cheryl exhaled, relieved. Good. Do it. One of them, the one with a smartwatch, spoke evenly. To reset it, you'll need the original registered admin to sign in again. Cheryl frowned. She's been terminated. He shrugged. Then, good luck. No sarcasm, no malice, just a simple, merciless fact. They closed their laptops, wound their cables, and left. Not another word. 3 o'clock. Cheryl called legal, then the insurance company, then the board chairman, her uncle. 3 voices, 3 tones, one answer. No one except Ms. Ortiz has the legal right to authorize Hera's operation. On the other end of the line, she fell silent. I could picture her hands tightening, searching for a loophole between law and desperation. Can we grant an emergency authorization? The lawyer answered patiently, the way you explain the obvious for the 10th time. You can't authorize a right you don't possess. The license belongs to the original registrant. What about a temporary exception? The insurance rep cut her off flatly. Operate without a legally registered responsible person, and the entire policy becomes void. She placed the phone down quietly. The only sound in the room was the steady hum of the air vent. Cold, precise, almost mocking. Hera sent a warning log to my device. Unauthorized access attempt detected. I opened it. As expected, Cheryl was forcing admin control. I stared at the line longer than necessary, not angry, not proud, just familiar. When you've watched someone die from expired medicine, you understand. A wrong action, even with good intent, is still wrong. But Cheryl wasn't done. She called for a system recovery meeting. 10 people gathered around the table. On the whiteboard, she'd written, solutions only. One said, create a new account. Another, reset the entire permission chain. A third chimed in, use last week's backup. Greg sat at the far end, silent for half an hour, then finally said, do any of you know where that backup is stored? No one answered. He continued, on Hera, under the same authentication chain as the root admin, meaning, still tied to Ortiz. Cheryl gripped her pen so hard the tip snapped, ink bleeding across the table. That's impossible. One person can't hold all that authority. Greg looked up, eyes tired but calm. She didn't hold it, she carried it. We gave her that power because no one else understood it well enough to bear it. A young engineer spoke timidly. What if we rebuild the software from scratch? Greg gave a low, weary laugh. Sure. If you've got 18 months, $10 million, and another her. The room went silent. Cheryl looked around, lips trembling. I just wanted to clean the books. Greg replied slowly, like explaining a principle to a child. The books are clean. The fridges are empty. No one spoke again. Only the cold wind slipped through the half-closed windows. Later that evening, I received an email from a former logistics employee. Subject: They're freezing up. Attached was a photo of the Hera dashboard. Every field grayed out, red only. In the corner, faint text read, System in preservation mode. Awaiting legal validation. I didn't need to scroll. That was the final safeguard I'd written. When the system detects a legal conflict, it locks itself. No one, not even me, can unlock it without the responsible person's signature. I heard later that in the control room, Cheryl whispered a question, barely audible. Why would she do this? Greg didn't look at her. He just said, clearly enough for the room to hear, cold doesn't kill people. Skipping the procedure does. The words spread. Someone repeated them. They reached me. For the first time, I heard a refrigeration engineer sound like a priest. That night, I sat in my apartment in Santa Fe. My mother asked, Are you all right? I nodded. On the table, Hera's interface glowed faintly. Its messages hung in limbo, like a heartbeat caught between life and flatline. I didn't destroy them, Mom. I just stopped holding them up. She smiled, eyes soft with understanding. Keeping things cold is still keeping people alive, isn't it? Yes, Mom, but only if they know how to keep it. At Desert Hands Relief, the building was eerily quiet that night. No keyboard clicks, no phone rings. Departments turned on each other, logistics blaming IT blaming HR blaming the woman who left. Cheryl stayed behind, alone. On the monitor, one message blinked over and over. Authorization denied. Responsible person not found. She leaned back in her chair, eyes hollow, whispering, I just wanted clean books. But the books were clean. Only the refrigerators were empty. Near midnight, Greg texted me. They've learned. I didn't reply. I just stared out the window where the desert wind blew cold and thin, like the breath of a final lesson. Some lessons don't need to be taught twice. They freeze on their own. And then the phones in the quietest rooms began to ring. The phone rang all morning. Not from the company. From places where phones rarely ring. From a nursing home in Gallup. From a Navajo reservation hospital in Shiprock. From a small clinic so remote that the signal was weaker than the patient's hope. They all called for the same reason. Not to report an error, not to complain about a system. Just one sentence, rough, slow, tired, and painfully honest. We don't need drama. We just need the medicine. I listened to the voicemails. Each voice carried long pauses, the kind that come when someone is trying to hide their fear. They didn't know I wasn't there anymore. Or maybe they did, and called anyway. Maybe they hoped Hera could still hear. At Desert Hands Relief headquarters, no one could answer the phones. Not because they didn't want to, because the call system ran through Hera, too. The same integrated logistics platform they once bragged about was now just a silent, breathless box. In the legal department, a young intern was combing through old records looking for something, anything, that could be used as a defense. She found an unopened email, subject line, handover, if I get hit by a bus, 77 pages, from me, sent 6 months earlier, sitting quietly in Cheryl Bloom's inbox, unread. The intern printed it out and carried it into the meeting room. The group fell silent when they saw that title on paper. Cheryl stared at it, pale, lips pressed tight. Maybe in that moment, she finally understood what she had ignored. Not an email, a warning. The emergency meeting started at 11 a.m. I wasn't there, but Greg told me later. The CEO opened with the kind of question only the lost can ask. Can we hire her back? Legal answered, voice cautious, as if stepping on thin ice. Only if she agrees, in person, to re-sign the operational license. There's no other way. The room went quiet. People who once treated me like software sat as still as stone. Greg looked across the table at Cheryl. Do you want me to be honest? He asked. She said nothing. He continued. Cold is stable. Arrogance isn't. No one argued. The words hung in the air, sharp and clear as the temperature inside the warehouse. I heard that after the meeting, Cheryl didn't leave the room. She just sat there, staring at the white wall, surrounded by blank monitors. Maybe she was trying to remember the day, the hour, the reason she never opened that email. People always search for reasons to justify embarrassment. But sometimes there isn't one, just a single careless moment. By afternoon, a team from the Federal Drug Administration called. They wanted to know why the cold storage system hadn't updated its certification data. No one could answer. Because every DEA license, every refrigeration certificate, every operational permit was tied to my signature. The federal agent spoke calmly, the way someone delivers a verdict. Without a valid responsible person, all pharmaceutical distribution must cease immediately. The sentence echoed through the conference speakers. Every head turned toward Cheryl. She sat still, hands flat on the table, fingers trembling. No one reached out. No one said, "I told you so." Because by then, no one in that room stood higher than anyone else. Greg left the meeting and stepped outside to smoke. From the balcony, he looked down at the loading bay, where the refrigerated trucks sat in silence, a thin layer of frost dulling the words, "Desert Hands Relief." He called me. I answered after the third ring. His voice was rough, tired, but steady, the tone of someone who understands consequences. "We used to think cold was the scary part. And now?" I asked. "No. Cold just keeps things as they are. What kills is complacency." I didn't answer. Sometimes silence is the only kind response to someone relearning how to listen. Meanwhile, Hera kept running at its lowest setting, maintaining temperature, stable, unbroken, yet refusing every shipment command. A system so perfect it would rather stop than be wrong. Out on Navajo land, an elderly nurse wrote her shift log by hand. Her handwriting trembled. No medicine. Patients waiting. The wind outside feels colder than usual. In Gallup, a nursing home manager turned on the backup generator to keep the fridge alive. She placed her phone on the table and spoke slowly into the voicemail. "If you can hear this, please turn the system back on, even just a small part. We have someone who needs insulin within 3 hours." Her voice cracked, then fell silent. No anger, no blame, just the exhaustion of someone begging quietly. That night, I couldn't sleep. I opened my laptop. Hera's interface still glowed faintly blue. Everything was fine. Everything was waiting. I could intervene. All I had to do was reauthorize my credentials. But I didn't. Because if I went back now, the lesson would lose its weight. People only change when they feel the cold edge of consequence. Near midnight, Greg texted again. "The CEO is planning to drive to Santa Fe. They want to meet you." I replied simply, "I don't sell my signature." 5 minutes. Later, he sent one more message. "I know, but someone's learning how to apologize." I stared at the screen, silent, then shut the laptop. Outside, the desert wind moved evenly, not cold, not warm, just steady enough to remind me of one thing. Between humans and systems, the real danger isn't failure, it's arrogance. And sometimes the calls from the quietest places are the loudest warnings of all. Morning in Santa Fe felt nothing like Albuquerque. No desert wind slipping through rows of cold storage, just sunlight, thin as a thread, wrapping around the glass building where I now worked. This office had no hum of compressors, no antiseptic sting in the air, only the scent of pine and the steady tick of a wall clock breathing quietly in the background. I sat at my desk, signing the final page of a new contract, operational and compliance consulting for the Santa Fe Regional Hospital Network. The first line of the agreement was printed in bold. Compliance is not just law, it's a promise to the patient. I read that line slowly, the way someone repeats a vow to themselves, because for me, it was never a slogan. It was the definition of the work. The clock struck 9. My assistant stepped in with a fresh cup of coffee. I thanked her with a smile, then glanced at the monitor. A breaking headline scrolled across the bottom of the local news channel. "Desert Hands Relief halts operations due to the loss of its license. Federal agency reviewing long-term suspension. No footage, no interviews, just a few sterile lines, and they were enough." I took a sip, the bitterness spreading slowly. There was no triumph in it, only a quiet peace, the kind that comes after a moral storm has passed. My phone buzzed. A message from Greg. His voice translated perfectly into text. Brief, rough-edged, and honest. They never deserved you. I stared at the words for a moment, then replied, the patients did. A few seconds later, he sent a single green dot. I understood. That was his way of saying, it's steady now. I leaned back and looked out the wide window. Below, Santa Fe moved at its own calm pace. An old woman walked her dog. 2 college students stopped their bikes to share a burrito. No one knew, or needed to know, that somewhere a company had collapsed for forgetting one simple word: responsibility. Letters still reached me, from mountain clinics, from Navajo health posts, from the nursing home in Gallup. None carried blame. They just described how they'd managed, finding emergency supplies, tapping reserves, keeping patients stable. One nurse wrote by hand, "We don't have your system, but we learned to keep the cold right. Thank you for the instructions you left behind." I folded that letter carefully and placed it in my drawer. My work now was different. I no longer managed warehouses or stayed up through the night watching data scroll. I taught others how to keep things running without me. At every session, I began with the same line: if you can leave and the place still runs, you've done your job right. People always laughed. But I wasn't joking. Because once, when I disappeared, an entire company stopped. And that wasn't glory, that was a warning. At noon, I opened my inbox, an invitation from the Regional Health Organization. Conference on Ethical Management in Pharmaceutical Supply Chains. I clicked accept, not for recognition, but to remind others of this. Sometimes compliance is the last form of kindness left in a system too busy to be human. By late afternoon, golden light washed over the old adobe walls. My mother sat by the window, knitting a scarf. She asked, "Have you forgotten them yet?" I shook my head. No. But I don't remember them with anger. She smiled slowly. Good. Cold that stays warm lasts longer. I laughed. It sounded exactly like something Greg would say. Simple, true, and just cold enough. That night, after the monitor went dark, I opened my old notebook. On the last page, written in red ink years ago, were the words I'd once scrawled at Desert Hands. No one keeps what they take lightly. I closed the book. On my tablet, a new contract glowed, approved. I signed with the stylus, clean and deliberate. A small window appeared. Please confirm the responsible operator. I typed my name, Marina Ortiz. The system replied, verification successful. The screen light fell across my face. Not bright, just enough to see that I was still here, present, real. Narration. I don't believe in karma. I believe in Clause 12. The responsible person must be physically present. A pause. Because machines can replace each other. Trust can't. And sometimes the only way to keep it is to never let anyone else hold it for you. I turned off the lights. Outside, Santa Fe shimmered like a field of fallen stars. I looked out at the glowing city and smiled, not because I'd won, but because I hadn't lost myself. At exactly 6:43 in the morning, 5 days after I left Desert Hands Relief, Hera sent its final message. No alarms, no sirens, just an email, cold, steady, as rhythmic as an artificial heartbeat. Subject: Compliance Purge executed. Compliance Purge completed. To restore operation, the registered responsible person must return in person. Beneath that line, in faint gray font, few would ever notice, generated automatically by System Protocol TL12, Clause 12, the one no one had ever read, the one I left behind, not as revenge, but as protection. At headquarters, the CEO sat in silence on the 3rd floor. The blue glow of the monitor washed over his pale face. Outside the glass walls, IT and logistics teams still fought to restart the system, each clutching a printout of error charts, as if they could will Hera back to life. Greg later told me the CEO just stared at the line, reading it aloud like a last will and testament. To restore operation, the registered responsible person must return in person. He lifted his eyes toward Cheryl Bloom, the lipstick gone, hair disheveled, hands clenched on the table like someone struggling to stay upright. "Have you read the handover?" he asked. No answer, only the soft spin of the ceiling fan and the light glinting off unsigned papers. By noon, a second message arrived. This one not from Hera, but from the Federal Drug Administration. The operational license of Desert Hands Relief is temporarily suspended due to the absence of a legally registered responsible person. At the same time, hospitals across the region received their own notice. Insulin supply rerouted to partner facility in Santa Fe. On the logistics map, new arrows appeared, tracing a fresh line through the cold chain network I'd helped activate 2 days earlier. The first pallet of insulin left Santa Fe at 1:07 p.m. No fanfare, no photos, no applause. Just the quiet roll of wheels over concrete and the desert wind brushing against metal doors. On the monitoring screen, Hera displayed one clean message. Shipment verified. Responsible person active. I read it, took a sip of cold coffee, and smiled. Back in Albuquerque, Cheryl sat alone, staring at the list of layoffs. Every number made sense on paper, but no one trusted the company enough to stay. Greg stood at her door, resignation letter in hand. "I'm heading to Santa Fe," he said. "They need someone who can keep things cold without losing their head." She didn't reply. He set the letter down and walked out. The door closed behind him, leaving her alone, just as she'd once left me. I learned about it later from Greg's brief text. First pallet's gone. I sent back a single dot. No words needed. Just the knowledge that the system was doing what it was built to do, keep its promise. That afternoon, sunlight spilled gold across my office window in Santa Fe. I watched a line of small trucks pull out of the new facility. None of the drivers knew my name, and that was exactly how I wanted it. A man beside me, the regional hospital liaison, asked, "Would you like us to include your name in the release? The one who redesigned the process?" I shook my head. No need. A system doesn't need a name. It just needs someone who can stand upright. He chuckled softly and nodded, maybe not understanding, but not questioning either. That evening, an automated email arrived from Hera, sent to the backup address I'd once linked. Subject: Status report. All systems are stable, compliance verified. Ethical alignment, 100%. At the bottom, a line I had added years ago for myself: Hera is not loyal to people. Hera is loyal to principles. I reread it and realized, sometimes a system doesn't need a heart to do the right thing. It just needs to be built with conscience. People say I destroyed a company. I disagree. I simply took my hands off the wheel. They'd forgotten how to turn because of me. And when the one who carries the weight steps away, those left behind finally learn what they were standing on. Outside, the sunset stretched wide, painting the desert gold like a thin autumn blanket. Santa Fe glowed quietly. Streetlights flickered on, one by one, like the calm heartbeat of a system that had learned its lesson. I wasn't bitter. I wasn't proud. Just still. Because at last, everything had returned to balance. Justice for principle and boundaries for pride. If you've ever watched an organization collapse because it fired the one person who actually understood how it worked, tell me. So next time we won't have to hear another alarm. Because sometimes that sound isn't a warning of fire, it's a warning of a lesson on its way.